Most people assumed this was just Appalachian folklore, a campfire story. But when researchers started checking the details, one thing didn't make sense. The court records were real. The trial happened. And in 1897, in a small county courtroom, testimony about a ghost helped send a man to prison for murder. It is to this day the only case in American legal history where the words of a dead woman were entered into the record, and the killer was convicted anyway. When I first read this case file, I didn't believe it either. By the end of this video, you will. Greenbrier County, West Virginia, 1896. Elva Zona Heister was a young woman living an ordinary rural life. Farms, church, small community where everyone knew everyone. In October of that year, she married a man who had recently drifted into town. His name was Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe, but he told people to call him Edward. He was a blacksmith, strong, charming, a stranger with no history anyone could verify. The wedding happened fast. Too fast, some said. But Zona was in love. And in a town that small, a handsome new blacksmith felt like good luck. There was only one person who didn't celebrate. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heister. From the moment she met Edward Shoe, something about him made her skin crawl. She couldn't explain it. She just knew. At first, the marriage looked normal, but neighbors started noticing small things. Edward was controlling, possessive. He watched how Zona dressed, and there was one detail that seemed innocent at the time, a detail that would become the most disturbing part of this case. Edward liked Zona to wear a high collar or a scarf around her neck, always around her neck. Nobody thought anything of it. Why would they? It was 1896. Fashion was modest. Husbands had opinions. But ask yourself this: how many warning signs do we walk past every single day simply because they're dressed up as something ordinary? Zona ignored her mother's warnings. She ignored the isolation, the control, the way Edward's charm switched off the moment the front door closed. She was a newlywed. She wanted it to work. Her mother later said she prayed about her fear almost every night. But there was nothing she could point to. No bruises anyone saw, no proof. Just a feeling, the kind of feeling this channel exists to document. If you've been watching these cases with me for a while, you already know what happens to the people who ignore that feeling. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this is the part where everything changes. Winter came. Zona's visits home became less frequent, shorter. Edward was usually nearby listening. Mary Jane's unease hardened into dread. She would later testify that she begged God to show her the truth, because no living person was going to tell her. Think about that. A mother in 1897 with no phone, no police welfare checks, no way to reach a daughter who lived under her husband's watch. All she could do was wait. And on January 23, 1897, the waiting ended. That morning, Edward Shoe went to work at the blacksmith shop. Then he did something strange. He sent a neighbor's boy to his house on an errand to check if his wife needed anything. The boy walked into the house and found Zona at the bottom of the stairs, stretched out, perfectly straight, one hand on her stomach, eyes open. She was 23 years old. And here's where the case turns. By the time the local doctor, George Knapp, arrived nearly an hour later, Edward had already carried his wife's body upstairs. He had already washed her, and he had already dressed her himself in a stiff high-collared dress with a veil over her face and a scarf tied around her neck. When Dr. Knapp tried to examine the body, Edward cradled his wife's head in his arms. and sobbed so violently that the doctor, out of respect for a grieving husband, cut the examination short. Cause of death was recorded first as an everlasting faint, and later changed to childbirth complications. At the funeral, witnesses noticed Edward never left the head of the casket. He propped her head between a rolled pillow and a rolled cloth. He said it would help her rest easier. And when mourners moved the body, they noticed something. A strange looseness in the neck. Zona was buried. The case was closed. And that should have been the end. But the story didn't end there. Mary Jane Heaster took the sheet from inside her daughter's coffin home and tried to wash it. She claimed the water turned red. Then the sheet turned pink, and the stain never fully washed out. She took it as a sign. For 4 weeks, she prayed for her daughter to come back and tell her the truth. And according to her sworn courtroom testimony, Zona did. Over 4 consecutive nights, her daughter's spirit appeared at her bedside. The apparition described a cruel marriage, a violent husband, and a final night where Edward attacked her in a rage over dinner, seizing her neck and crushing it. The ghost allegedly said her neck had been squeezed off at the first joint. And on the final night, Mary Jane claimed, the spirit turned her own head completely around to prove it. Now, you don't have to believe in ghosts, because what matters is what happened next. Mary Jane went to the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, and refused to leave until he reopened the case. Preston did something remarkable. He interviewed the doctor, the neighbors, and he found enough real living suspicion to order an exhumation. Zona's body was dug up. An autopsy was performed over 3 days, and the findings were exactly what the ghost had described. Her neck was broken at the first vertebra, her windpipe was crushed, and on her throat, finger-shaped bruises. Edward Shue was arrested for murder, and during the investigation, his past finally surfaced. Zona was not his first wife. She was his third. His first marriage ended in divorce. His wife alleged brutal cruelty. His second wife died suddenly, less than a year into the marriage, under circumstances that were never investigated. At trial in June of 1897, the prosecution never mentioned the ghost. They didn't need to. It was Edward's own defense lawyer who brought it up, trying to make Mary Jane look insane. He cross-examined her about the apparition for hours. She never wavered, not on a single detail, and the jury believed her. Edward Shue was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, narrowly escaping a lynch mob on the way. He died behind bars in March of 1900. Today, a state historical marker still stands in Greenbrier County. It reads that the ghost's testimony helped convict a murderer. That marker is real. You can visit it. But here's the question I can't stop thinking about. Mary Jane Heaster knew details about her daughter's death that no living person had told her. So either a mother's instinct solved a perfect murder, or something came back to make sure it wasn't perfect. Comment below which one you believe. And if you thought a ghost convicting a killer was impossible, wait until you hear about the murder trial where the victim identified her killer in a dream that 3 separate people had on the same night. That story is on your screen right now.